There's a lot to unpack in Yann Martel's book, Life of Pi. This book has won Man Booker Prize and also has been turned into a movie. And I'm sure many of you would have read it or watched the movie. And as I said, there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of ideas to discuss here. But today, in this podcast, I will touch upon one key idea in the book. The idea of truth. Truth and its relativity. Because often when we talk about truth and lies, we use the absolute terms. Something is true, it means it is 100% true, it is objectively true. But then in this book, we understand the philosophy of truth in a different way. It's not something new, for sure. A lot of other philosophers have talked about it. But it's still an interesting idea. And in this podcast, I'm going to give away some spoilers, so make sure you've read the book. In case you haven't read the book, be prepared for some spoilers. So the book really it's a kind of a blend of reality and fiction. And as soon as you open the book, you read the introduction part, you kind of wonder whether author is telling a real story here or is just a fiction. He talks about his previous novels and how they haven't been successful. Then he comes to India and then he's looking for a story. And there he meets a person called Pai Patel who tells him an interesting story. And according to Pai Patel, this story will make the author believe in God. So that's how it begins. And right from the beginning, as I said, there are gray areas. You're constantly wondering, is it really true? Is it a true story? Is it a memoir? What is it? But then that's the exact point the author is trying to establish here. That we don't know, probably in a lot of cases, what is true. And mostly in life, it doesn't really matter. So to begin this discussion, let's start with the fundamental question of truth. What is truth really? And according to Yann Martel, the truth is, it's a way to explain the reality. And of course, there can be many ways to perceive or explain the reality. Because there are as many people and they perceive and explain things differently. So that means there are going to be as many ways to tell a truth. So for example, when you look at the ocean, you may say that you're looking at the ocean. That's one way to go about it. But you can also say that you're looking at water. You're looking at H2O molecules. Or you can say you're looking at a vast contour of blue color. You can also say that you're looking at God. Which one of these sentences is true? It's very hard to say. Now, this is exactly how Pai Patel, the protagonist, argues in this book. So I'm going to quote a few sentences of what he says in a conversation. These are kind of rhetorical questions, but you'll get the point. He says, doesn't the telling of something always become a story? Isn't telling about something using words of English or Japanese already something of an invention? Isn't just looking upon this world already something of an invention? The world isn't just the way it is how we understand it, right? And in understanding something, we bring something to it. Doesn't that make life a story? Now, when you take a look at these questions one by one and untangle them, There are a few things that you learn here. First is that the idea is that the moment we look at the outside, the objective world, we create an image of it through our perceptions in our mind. This means we have already moved away from the true absolute reality. Now, once perceived, when we talk about this reality, once again there is an obvious gap in the perceived reality and the narrated reality. So, once again, we move one step away from the reality. So, in other words, the author is making a case that the truth will always be relative and never absolute. Of course, this doesn't mean that we are lying all the time. No. It's just that the conception of truth in our minds, it's very limited and it lacks depth. But the author is hopeful. He asks us to seek, to have that thirst to seek. And when we have that, he believes that we'll find the answers, we'll find the truth. So now, the author, through protagonist, he extends this idea of truth to the question of God. And that's where it gets more interesting. So, first of all, he suggests that, like any other idea, the idea of God is first introduced to us by somebody else. And it is introduced through stories. So, once again, using the same logic as we used earlier, it means that there will be an element of story, an element of invention in it. And that's exactly what religions do. They tell some really interesting stories. But the author sees it differently. He says the religions, what they do is they selectively twist the reality and they make stories so that they can preserve and they can bring out the sense of reality. That's a really interesting way to look at it. Now, this leads to another interesting philosophical point, which is something that you'll find very much a part of Christian theology. So, in the story of Life of Pi, just like the protagonist was separated from his father and mother when the tragedy strikes, the idea here is that we are also separated from God. When we are in this world, we are fated to be lonely. That is our fate. But even here, even in the midst of all this misery and loneliness, according to this idea, there is God. This light still shines within us. And that's the theological element in it. And continuing with this theological element, the author also talks about death. And now in the idea of death, through the story, he talks about incarnation. So when you read the book, you kind of see the fusion of Hinduism, Christianity, Islam. In fact, author and the protagonist, they're talking about it openly, that they're bringing these elements of different religions together. So, when the author talks about the idea of death, he explains it metaphorically. So, what happens is, towards the end of the book, the tiger who's accompanying the protagonist on a boat, the tiger then eventually has to go when he reaches the shore. So, tiger in the story is symbolizing the physical dimension of the protagonist. The physical dimension, or the tiger in this story, he has many shades, many sides, good or bad, but mostly the tiger is pragmatic and he's using certain tools to achieve certain goals, and he's serving the protagonist throughout the journey. It is also hurting him, but at the same time, he's being a good companion. And at the moment of separation, we find the protagonist is a little sad, and that's symbolic of death. There's a sense of pain, as there is a sense of attachment there. This protagonist is attached to the tiger. And the idea behind is the soul is attached with the body. So there is this sense of loss. But there is also some kind of freedom, some liberation there, as the protagonist feels. Because the journey does not end there. The journey continues. And that's the whole point there. That it doesn't end there. It's not the end of the story at death. It's merely a continuation. And that still is one of the many ideas and themes that you will find in the book. And of course, when we discuss these ideas, it's going to take a lot of episodes, a lot of time, and we'll do that in future too. But for now, it's all about the truth, how it's not really absolute according to the author, according to his philosophy in this book, and how we can see the relative side of it, how we can take comfort in the fact that it's all right if we don't find truth in stories. We can find meaning. We can find the depth of our own lives in it, in those stories. And that's really, really wonderful.